Red lights wash over the Harborview Medical Center doors as Maris Ainsworth is rushed in, motionless, her future reduced to a chart and a signature. Gideon Rourke arrives soaked from his 2013 Subaru Outback and finds a fresh DNR order waiting to pull the plug at 7 a.m. Everyone with power says it is mercy. His gut says it is a cover-up. Then he spots it, the signature is wrong, and Maris is supposed to testify in 48 hours. Can one broke public defender stop $1 billion silence before morning? Like and subscribe and tell me, where are you watching from? The ambulance doors closed behind Maris Ainsworth with a finality that felt rehearsed, as if the city had practiced this moment without her consent. At Harborview Medical Center, the intake team moved quickly, not rudely, just efficiently, and Gideon Rourke noticed how that efficiency erased her as a person almost immediately. She became a wristband, a chart, a sequence of numbers blinking on a monitor. The report said dockside electrical incident, said industrial charger, said loss of consciousness following discharge, and Gideon hated how calm the words sounded. He stood back because that was what people like him did. Defenders, observers, men who learned early that space was something you gave to authority. A nurse asked for his name, and he almost said it wrong, like he had forgotten who he was supposed to be tonight. When she asked his relationship to the patient, he hesitated, then said, "I was asked to come," which felt safer than explaining 20 years of distance, regret, and unfinished sentences. Somewhere behind a desk, a printer spit out forms, and one of them landed in front of him, a "Do Not Resuscitate" order with Maris's name typed neatly at the top. The timestamp was recent, too recent. Gideon stared at the signature and felt his chest tighten, because for one suspended second, he believed it. He believed she had chosen this without him, without warning, because that was easier than believing someone had decided for her. Gideon had driven across Seattle in his 2013 Subaru Outback, with the heater broken on the passenger side, windshield wipers smearing rain instead of clearing it, rehearsing nothing and everything at once. The message from the nurse had been short, almost careless. "She asked for you years ago," and it echoed now as he stood at the nursing station, coat dripping onto the tile. He had no flowers, no card, no clean explanation for why he belonged there. Men in tailored coats passed him, speaking softly into phones about timelines and exposure, and Gideon caught words like board and statement without context. When he picked up the DNR form again, his legal instincts kicked in, not loudly, but insistently. He checked the date, the witness line, the signature. The name was right, the letters confident, but the rhythm was wrong. Maris used to sign her name like she was underlining herself, pressing hard on the last letter, a habit from cheap notebooks and stubborn ambition. This signature floated, elegant but detached. Gideon's fingers were still wet as he opened the battered folder he had carried for years, a habit he pretended was professional and knew was personal. Inside was an old power of attorney, drafted during their scholarship program days. When Maris believed paperwork could protect people, the signatures did not match. The difference was small, but Gideon had built a career on small differences mattering. The hospital did not pause for his realization. A security guard approached, polite but firm, asking if he was authorized to be there. Gideon explained briefly, carefully, and watched the guard's eyes flick to the men in suits down the hall before returning to him. Phones started ringing, and somehow Gideon's name was suddenly known by people who had never spoken to him. Someone from the company's legal team called, voice smooth, suggesting that emotions were high and mistakes happened in crises. Maris's mother arrived with expensive perfume and a controlled expression that cracked only when she saw the tubes. She did not hug Gideon, did not even look at him at first, and when she did, her gaze held accusation more than recognition. A cousin hovered nearby, whispering updates into an iPhone, as if narrating a market shift. When Gideon tried to speak about the signature, the word forgery stopped in his throat. The neurologist on call, Dr. Lillian Sato listened with the patience of someone who had heard desperate theories before. She did not dismiss him, but she did not agree either. "I need evidence, not instincts," she said, and Gideon respected her for it, even as it terrified him. Instincts were all he had right now. When Gideon was finally allowed into the room, the reality of Maris hit him harder than any argument outside. She looked smaller than he remembered, stripped of her sharpness, but there was still something unmistakable about her presence, like a room holding heat after a fire. Tubes traced paths over her skin, machines breathed where she could not, and Gideon felt a wave of shame for every year he had chosen distance over discomfort. He pulled a chair close, careful not to disturb anything, and took her hand because it felt wrong not to. Her skin was cool but not lifeless, and the contact grounded him in a way nothing else had since he arrived. He spoke quietly, not to wake her, but to remind himself she existed. He told her he was here, that he was sorry, that Noah was okay, that Seattle still smelled like rain and coffee. When he said her last name, Rourke, the way she used to when she wanted him to stop apologizing for taking up space, his voice broke despite his effort. That was when the truth settled in fully, not as a legal conclusion, but as a human one. If the DNR was false, someone wanted her silent. Someone wanted her gone before she could speak, and Gideon understood, with a clarity that scared him, that staying was no longer optional. Outside the room, the conversations grew sharper. Words like liability and precedent were exchanged, as if they carried more weight than a woman's pulse. Gideon heard someone mention the press, and another person suggest speed as mercy. The security guard returned, closer now, reminding Gideon that visiting hours were limited. Gideon nodded, thanked him, and did not move. Dr. Sato came back with charts, her expression unchanged, but her questions more precise. Gideon showed her the old document, explained the signature, the timing, the context of Maris's upcoming testimony without embellishment. He did not accuse anyone by name. He did not beg. He simply laid the facts down the way he had learned to in courtrooms that smelled like paper and resignation. Dr. Sato studied the papers longer this time, then said she would note his concerns, which was not a promise, but was not nothing. Maris's mother watched this exchange, arms crossed, and for a moment her certainty wavered. Gideon caught it, that flicker of doubt, and knew it mattered. Everything mattered now, every look, every delay, every decision that bought them minutes. When Gideon returned to Maris's side, the hallway clock read just past 1 in the morning. He counted backward automatically, calculating how much time he had before 7, before paperwork became action. He stayed seated, her hand still in his, anchoring himself to the fact that she was here and he was not leaving. He thought about the boy waiting at home, about the fragile stability he risked by defying people with more power than him, and about how strange it was that the bravest thing he had done in years was simply refusing to step away. The rain continued outside, unseen, irrelevant. What mattered was the slow rise and fall of Maris's chest, the weight of her fingers in his palm, and the understanding that settled into him without drama. This was not a medical fight. It was not even a legal one yet. It was human, messy, and unfinished, and the clock would decide nothing on its own. There were hours left before 7, and Gideon intended to use every one of them. Seattle was still dark when Gideon stepped out of Harborview, the kind of dark that made time feel suspended rather than late. He stood under the overhang long enough to pull his phone from his pocket and check the time again, even though he already knew it, 2:11 a.m. Too early for answers and too late for excuses. The ride downtown felt unavoidable, not strategic. He walked the familiar blocks toward Westlake Station with the reflexes of someone who had spent years counting steps and exits, his mind running through fragments instead of plans. On the platform, he joined a small cluster of people pretending not to look at one another, nurses ending shifts, a janitor sipping from a paper cup, a man in a Seahawks beanie reading yesterday's Seattle Times. When the Link Light Rail one line arrived, Gideon boarded without hesitation and sat near the door, phone balanced in his palm. He scrolled through the photos he had taken of Maris's old documents, pinching the screen to enlarge the signature, then pulling back, then enlarging again. The repetition was almost soothing. Across from him, a woman watched him for a moment, then looked away, as if recognizing that kind of concentration as something private. Gideon thought about how many hours he had spent underground in court buildings, waiting for decisions that shaped lives without ever feeling the weight of it like this. Each stop passed like a borrowed favor, and he knew he was running out of them. He called an old colleague from the federal courthouse as the train rattled north, someone who still owed him a favor from a case years back. The call went to voicemail first, then rang again when Gideon tried a second time, and finally the man answered with a sigh that said more than words. Gideon explained quickly, keeping his voice low, talking about the DNR, the signature discrepancy, the urgency. There was a pause on the other end, long enough for Gideon to picture the man rubbing his eyes, glancing at a calendar, weighing risk. "You know how this works," the voice said at last, not unkindly. "Middle of the night, hospital lawyers already involved, corporate money backing them. You're asking for a miracle, Gideon." Gideon swallowed and replied, "I'm asking for a delay, a hearing, someone to look twice." The answer he got was not a no, but it was close enough to bruise. Promises of callbacks, suggestions of filing electronically, reminders that judges were human and humans slept. Gideon thanked him anyway because burning bridges was a luxury he could not afford. When the call ended, he stared at his reflection in the darkened window and wondered how many times he had told clients the same thing, that systems were slow and fairness was conditional. Hearing it applied to Maris felt like betrayal, even though no one had changed the rules. The message about the meeting came through just as the train slowed near University Street, short and almost friendly, asking if he could talk somewhere quiet, near Pike Place Market. Gideon knew better than to trust the tone, but he also knew he needed information more than pride. He exited at Westlake and walked uphill, past closed storefronts and delivery trucks, toward a cafe that stayed open for early vendors and insomniacs. Inside, the air was too warm, the smell of burnt espresso clinging to his clothes as he shook off his jacket. He ordered coffee he did not want, paid in cash out of habit, and waited. When Brennan Hale arrived, he looked exactly like someone who never waited for permission, composed, alert, already smiling as if the outcome was settled. They exchanged names they both already knew. Brennan spoke first, asking about Gideon's drive, about Harborview, about how difficult these situations could be. The empathy felt rehearsed, but effective. When Brennan slid the envelope across the table, he did it casually, as if passing a menu. "This doesn't have to be hard," he said. Gideon did not open it, but he felt the weight through the paper, the insult of it sitting between them, like an assumption. For a moment, Gideon said nothing. He thought about Noah at home, probably awake now, watching videos on his phone instead of sleeping, pretending independence he did not feel. He imagined the relief of taking the envelope, of calling the hospital and stepping aside, of telling himself he had done what he could. Brennan watched him carefully, mistaking silence for negotiation. "You go back to your life," Brennan added, voice calm, "and this becomes someone else's problem." Gideon finally looked at him and asked, "Whose?" The question landed harder than Brennan expected, and his smile tightened. Gideon pushed the envelope back, slow and deliberate. "I don't have another life," he said quietly. "This is it." Brennan leaned back, studying him, then nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "Then you should be careful," he replied. "People get hurt when they confuse obligation with importance." Gideon stood, leaving the coffee untouched. As he walked out, he felt eyes on his back, not just Brennan's, Outside, a nondescript sedan idled near the curb, its headlights dim. It pulled out seconds after Gideon turned the corner. He did not look back again, but he memorized the feeling, the certainty that the game had changed. The ride back toward Harborview felt longer, even though the route was the same. Gideon boarded the train again, choosing a different car this time, watching reflections instead of faces. His phone buzzed with a text from Noah, just a question mark, and Gideon typed back, "Busy, be home soon," knowing it was a lie, and hoping it was not a promise. When he reached the hospital, the atmosphere had shifted. The security guard at the entrance nodded stiffly, recognition without warmth. Inside, conversations stopped when Gideon approached, then resumed in lower tones. He caught fragments about liability and risk management, about statements being drafted. Dr. Sato met him near the nurses' station, her expression serious but not hostile. "We're running out of time," she said. "If there's no clinical justification, we proceed." Gideon felt the floor tilt under him, but he steadied himself by thinking of Maris's hand in his, the faint pressure he swore he had felt. "There is justification," he replied. "You just haven't looked hard enough yet." Dr. Sato studied him, weighing exhaustion against conviction. "One more set of tests," she said finally. "That's all I can justify." It was not victory, but it was oxygen. When Gideon returned to Maris's room, the clock on the wall read 4:36 a.m., the numbers glowing like a warning. He took his place beside her again, explaining in low, steady words where he had been, what he had refused, what little time they had left. He did not know if she could hear him, but he spoke as if she could, because speaking was the only way he knew to stay present. When Dr. Sato came in with the equipment, Gideon stepped back, heart pounding, watching as she adjusted settings and prepared to reduce sedation. No speeches, no dramatics, just careful movements and professional restraint. Gideon understood then what mattered, not the arguments or the threats, but this insistence on looking again, on not letting paperwork decide a human ending. As he waited, counting breaths that were not his own, he realized the night had brought him exactly where he feared and exactly where he needed to be. Back at Harborview, standing his ground, asking for one last honest look, with the same clock ticking towards 7 and nothing left to give but refusal to leave. The room settled into a kind of held breath as Dr. Sato adjusted the settings, her movements careful without being theatrical, the way someone works when they understand that confidence matters more than speed. Gideon stayed where he was, fingers wrapped around Maris's hand, aware that this contact was the only claim he had that could not be argued away. He spoke quietly to her, not because anyone asked him to, but because silence felt like abandonment. He told her his car was still parked crooked outside Harborview, that Noah hated mornings, but pretended he didn't, that the city would still be there if she came back. Dr. Sato explained what she was doing in plain language, reducing sedation incrementally, watching numbers that meant very little to Gideon, but everything to her. "This is not a miracle test," she said, not unkindly. "This is a response test." Maris's mother stood near the wall, arms folded tight across her chest, eyes fixed on her daughter's face with an intensity that suggested she was bargaining with herself. Gideon felt the weight of the moment, not as drama, but as responsibility. If this failed, he would have to live with knowing he had asked for hope and watched it fall apart. When Dr. Sato nodded to the technician to bring in the eye-tracking screen, Gideon's grip tightened slightly, not to hold Maris down, but to anchor himself in the fact that he was here and not leaving. The device was positioned carefully, its screen glowing with a neutral interface that looked almost insulting in its simplicity. Gideon watched Maris's eyes as if he could will them open, as if effort were contagious. Dr. Sato's voice was calm, almost conversational, asking Maris to look left if she could hear her. Seconds passed that felt like minutes, and Gideon became acutely aware of how many times he had waited for answers in his life, in courtrooms, on phone calls, in relationships that never quite started. He felt Maris's mother shift beside him, heard her inhale sharply, then stop herself from saying anything. Gideon thought of apologies he would never get to make if this ended now. Then Maris's eyes moved, not smoothly, not confidently, but unmistakably toward the left. Gideon froze, afraid to react too quickly, afraid the movement might disappear if acknowledged. Dr. Sato repeated the instruction, her voice still measured, though something in her posture changed. Again, Maris's eyes responded. The technician murmured confirmation, and someone behind Gideon exhaled a shaky breath. Maris's mother covered her mouth, tears finally breaking through the control she had worn like armor. Gideon did not cry yet. He felt something heavier, a sense of standing at the edge of something that demanded proof, not belief. Dr. Sato explained the next step, that they would attempt communication through selection, not speech, not movement, just intent. Letters appeared on the screen, cycling slowly, each one offered like a question. Gideon leaned closer, careful not to crowd Maris, whispering that she could take her time, that no one was rushing her, even though the clock on the wall said otherwise. The first few attempts went nowhere, Maris's eyes drifting, struggling, and Gideon felt the familiar panic rise, the fear that he had pushed too far. Dr. Sato paused the sequence, adjusted the sensitivity, and tried again. This time, Maris blinked deliberately when the letter A appeared. Gideon swallowed hard, his heart pounding as if he were the one being tested. The process was slow, almost painful to watch, each blink an effort that seemed to cost her something. When the letters finally formed a word, there was a brief moment of confusion, of disbelief. It was not help or stop or water. It was Aurora. The word hung there, undeniable. Dr. Sato leaned closer to the screen, her professional skepticism giving way to focused curiosity. "That's intentional," she said quietly. Maris's mother whispered, "What does that mean?" Her voice sounded small, stripped of authority. Gideon already felt something click into place, not fully formed, but insistent. He pulled out his phone with hands that trembled despite his effort to stay composed, scrolling through files he had dismissed as irrelevant months ago. Notes Maris had written, half-finished reminders, references that had meant nothing until now. He found the entry, the one-line note in her handwriting, Aurora Bridge, written as if it were obvious. Gideon looked up, meeting Dr. Sato's eyes, then Maris's mother's. "It's a place," he said, "not just a word." The room shifted again, not in atmosphere, but in direction. This was no longer about whether Maris was alive, it was about what she was trying to say. Outside the room, voices rose as news traveled quickly. Representatives from the board arrived, their language precise and agitated, talking about protocol violations and legal exposure. Gideon listened without engaging, because he understood something they did not. Maris had crossed a line they could not erase. She had communicated intent. Dr. Sato made the call to suspend the withdrawal order, documenting everything meticulously, her pen moving faster now. Gideon felt a surge of gratitude that surprised him. He had expected resistance, not integrity. When he looked back at Maris, he saw exhaustion etched into her face, but also determination. She had done what she needed to do. The rest would be on him. The morning crept closer without ceremony. Gideon stepped into the hallway to take a call and found Noah there instead, standing awkwardly near the vending machines, his jacket too big, his hair uncombed in a way that signaled stress rather than style. A neighbor had brought him after Gideon failed to answer his phone. Noah looked older in that moment, or maybe just more aware. "You didn't come home," he said, accusation and fear tangled together. Gideon crouched in front of him, ignoring the looks from passing staff. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." Noah's jaw tightened. "Are you going to leave again?" The question landed harder than any legal threat that night. Gideon did not reach for platitudes. He told the truth, the only version that mattered. "I don't know how to win," he said. "I don't know how to make things easy, but I know how to stay." Noah studied him, searching for exaggeration, then nodded once, a small gesture that felt like permission. Gideon stood, placing a hand on Noah's shoulder, grounding both of them. Behind them, in the room they had just left, Maris lay awake enough to change everything. The word on the screen had opened a door. Gideon intended to walk through it, and this time he was not walking alone. The days that followed fell into a strange, exhausting rhythm, one foot in a courtroom and the other beside a hospital bed, with Gideon learning to measure time in filings and vitals instead of hours. Mornings often began at Harborview Medical Center, where Maris's progress arrived in fragments, never enough to satisfy, always enough to demand hope. She still could not speak aloud, but her eyes tracked with intention now, and her hands squeezed with meaning, especially when Gideon mentioned Noah or the hearing dates. Dr. Sato, once strictly procedural, started marking progress on the whiteboard with small notes that felt almost celebratory. 5 seconds of sustained focus today, she said once, glancing at Gideon as if sharing a secret. Another day, correct word selection twice in a row. These were clinical facts, but Gideon treated them like milestones, texting Noah updates the way other guardians sent report cards. Outside the hospital, rain continued its steady negotiation with the city, and Gideon often ate standing up, half a sandwich from a corner deli, reading motions on his phone while waiting for elevators. Maris's mother came and went, quieter now, sitting longer, watching her daughter with the patience of someone learning humility late. Nothing felt resolved, but nothing felt lost anymore either, and that fragile balance kept Gideon upright when exhaustion threatened to fold him. The injunction came through on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered by a judge who did not smile or offer encouragement, only said that evidence warranted delay. It was not triumph, but it was survival. Gideon read the order twice on his cracked phone screen before allowing himself to breathe. The board's response was immediate and carefully hostile, a public statement about cooperation paired with private pressure that landed hard. Gideon received notice of a custody review, anonymous complaints questioning his stability, his motives, his proximity to Maris. He recognized the strategy and still felt it shake him. At night, back in his apartment, he opened the same drawer he had opened for years, touching the old power of attorney and the folded note Maris had once written him after a scholarship ceremony, telling him not to disappear on himself. He had kept it out of guilt, then habit, now necessity. It reminded him why he stayed when it would have been easier to step away. Noah watched him closely during these days, pretending indifference but asking pointed questions about court dates and whether people could just decide things for you. Gideon answered honestly, even when the truth was uncomfortable. "Sometimes they try," he said. "Sometimes they don't get to." Saying it out loud felt like a promise he intended to keep. When Maris finally managed a longer sequence on the tablet, it came without ceremony. Gideon was adjusting the chair when her eyes locked onto him, deliberate and steady. Dr. Sato brought the device closer, and this time the letters came faster, more confident. Maris asked for 2 things. The first was simple and devastating in its clarity. She wanted Noah present when she addressed the court, even if it was over video, even if it took her 10 minutes to say 1 sentence. The second request carried weight, Gideon felt immediately. She wanted to go somewhere, not as memory, but as proof. Not to remember, she spelled slowly. To finish. Gideon nodded without asking questions because he understood that some requests were explanations in themselves. He told her they would wait until her body allowed it, and she blinked once, satisfied. Later, Noah asked why she wanted him there. Gideon did not soften the answer. "Because she wants them to see what's at stake," he said. Noah absorbed that quietly, shoulders straightening in a way that made Gideon ache with pride and fear in equal measure. Weeks later, the rain eased just enough to make the day feel possible. Gideon drove his Subaru through familiar streets with deliberate care, as if every turn carried memory. They passed downtown, traffic pulsing with indifference, and continued north until the Aurora Bridge rose ahead, imposing and unavoidable. Maris sat bundled in a wheelchair, a blanket tucked around her legs, color returning faintly to her cheeks. Gideon noticed these small signs with the intensity of someone who had learned not to overlook them. Noah walked beside them, hands in his pockets, offering help only when asked, trying on maturity like a coat that did not quite fit. At the overlook, Gideon positioned the chair carefully, respecting boundaries, letting Maris take in the view she had asked for. She requested the tablet, and when the screen lit, the word Aurora appeared again, followed by more, slower now, but precise. She indicated a section beneath the bridge, maintenance access noted in city records. The court-appointed technician, neutral and efficient, followed her direction and opened a sealed compartment. Inside was the proof they had chased, a modified component, deliberate and undeniable. No one spoke for a moment because truth does not need commentary. It simply sits there, heavy. Relief came to Gideon in an unexpected form, quiet and sorrowful. He felt vindicated, yes, but also mourned the version of reality where this had not been necessary. Maris's mother stepped closer, her composure finally gone, and rested a hand on Gideon's shoulder. It was not an apology spoken aloud, but it carried more weight than one. Dr. Sato observed from a distance, her expression no longer clinical, but human, as if acknowledging the cost of survival. On the drive back, Noah broke the silence first. "She saved you," he said, not accusing, not praising, just stating fact. Gideon met his eyes in the rearview mirror and answered honestly. "She reminded me who I was supposed to be," he said. Maris slept through most of the ride, her breathing steady, exhaustion earned. Gideon felt the road unwind beneath them and realized that for the first time in months he was not bracing for impact. The catharsis did not arrive with headlines or applause. It came quietly, weeks later, in a courthouse hallway where Gideon signed forms with the same pen he used every day. Noah handed him the folded adoption paperwork with forced casualness, eyes fixed on the floor. "Just sign," he said, as if it were nothing. Gideon held the paper longer than necessary, feeling its weight, understanding what it meant to choose permanence. Later that day, he placed the signed form on the table in Maris's hospital room. She read it slowly, then looked at Noah and selected a single word on the tablet. Family. Noah turned away, embarrassed by how much it mattered. Gideon took both their hands, standing exactly where this journey had begun, and understood something that would stay with him long after. Healing had never been about returning to who they were. It was about choosing to remain together under the same fragile light, even when the dark tried to claim them first.